Hey there, fellow explorer, and welcome to a special Espirito edition of the Deep Dive.
Espirito.
Yeah, Espirito Deep, you could say.
I like that.
You know, it's Italian for expert, so we're
Ah,
taking our expertise to the next level for you today.
I'm
All right, let's dive into Istanbul. Why is this city always one of the most visited? We're going deep with Wikipedia's entry on Istanbul, and wow, there's a ton of info here. It's got history, geography, culture, the works.
even that giant list of languages at the start, that tells you something right there, right? About how global the city is.
Yeah, for sure. Istanbul's story spans cultures and time. Let's start with the name. Byzantium to Constantinople, even just the city for a while. Then Istanbul. Each name is like a clue to a whole different era,
It's true. Names reveal a lot about a city, how power shifted, what culture shaped it. Byzantium was the original Greek city.
right? The roots.
But when Emperor Constantine decided it would be his new capital, boom, Constantinople, Roman influence front and center.
So the city's identity kind of shifts right along with the name. It's interesting, even under the Byzantines, it was often just the city in Greek.
Yeah, that tells you how important it was then, right? The center of their world. And finally, Istanbul comes from Turkish, meaning to the city. That marks the Ottoman rule and the city's modern identity as Turkish.
So each name marks a huge turning point. But the story starts even earlier, way back in the 6th millennium BCE. That's even before the Bosporus Straits existed.
Imagine rising sea levels carving out the Bosporus, connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara. Changed the whole landscape, the environment. Istanbul's relationship with nature goes way, way back.
Puts our climate change stuff in perspective, right? To think Istanbul's seen such huge environmental shifts over thousands of years, it's incredible. But let's switch gears to empires. Istanbul was an imperial capital for Romans, Byzantines, Latins, Ottomans.
1,600 years as a capital. That's almost unmatched globally. It was in the perfect spot strategically.
Let's talk about that Istanbul as this bridge and barrier between East and West. What does that even mean, and how did it affect how the city developed?
Well, think about it. Istanbul's controlled access between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, where Europe meets Asia. A natural crossroads for trade, for culture to mix, unfortunately also for conflict. Empires wanted it to control those trade routes, to have influence.
So a bridge because it connected things, but a barrier because it could control, even block those connections, like holding the keys to a really important door.
Exactly. That double nature is built into Istanbul's history, why so many empires fought over it, why we're still fascinated by it today. And speaking of what lasts, let's talk architecture. I mean, this is a city where ancient monuments are right next to Byzantine masterpieces, Ottoman wonders. It's like a timeline in stone and marble. It really is. And each empire, they left their own architectural mark, this incredible mix of styles. You can practically trace the city's history through its buildings.
Love that. A mix of styles? Okay, ancient stuff. Like the obelisk of Thutmose III, all the way from Egypt, or the serpent column, which was originally in Delphi in Greece. Those show how connected Istanbul already was to powerful civilizations back then.
Imagine the journey those monuments took to get there. They're physical reminders of Istanbul's past as this crossroads.
And then, of course, the Hagia Sophia, a symbol of how brilliant Byzantine architecture was. And its history is so complex.
The Hagia Sophia, engineering and artistry combined, that dome, it's like it's floating above the city, but it's more than just looks. It's been a cathedral, a mosque, a museum, and then back to a mosque in 2020. That tells you about centuries of religion and politics changing.
It's seen empires rise and fall, religions mixing. Even what the building was starred changed over time. But speaking of changes, let's talk Ottomans. Their buildings define Istanbul's skyline today.
Right, the Blue Mosque, the Süleymaniye Mosque, those incredible shapes. These aren't just places to worship, they're masterpieces, captivating people from all over.
And the architect behind a lot of them, Mimar Sinan, chief architect for the whole Ottoman Empire, he designed some of their most iconic stuff. The Süleymaniye Mosque is one. His work shows the artistic brilliance of that era.
It wasn't just about beauty, though. Sinan was a master at combining practicality, spirituality, and beauty. You see his influence all over Istanbul, adding another layer to that architectural mix.
So we've talked names, empires, architecture, all this history, this layered legacy. How does that connect to why people love to visit Istanbul today? Why is it such a tourist magnet?
That's the question, isn't it? And the answer, I think, is in everything we've been talking about. Istanbul is a unique blend. It's got history, culture, modern life, all in one. You can walk where emperors walked, see ancient wonders, then have amazing Turkish coffee and a super trendy cafe, all in the same afternoon.
Like a history book come to life, but with Wi-Fi and great food. All right, tourism numbers. In 2023, Istanbul was the #1 most visited city in the world, over 20 million tourists. In 2024, it was a close second, with a whopping 23 million visitors. What do you think is causing this huge surge in popularity?
Well, there are a few things going on. Istanbul just has so much history, so many cultural experiences like no other city. It's a living museum. Every corner has a story. But it's also modern, vibrant, great art and culture scene, amazing food, bustling nightlife.
So it's that mix, the old and new together, that makes it so captivating.
Exactly. And it appeals to all kinds of travelers. History buffs, architecture lovers, foodies, people who want to experience different cultures, you name it.
Plus, Istanbul is often seen as more affordable than other big tourist spots, right?
For sure, that's a big factor, especially these days when people are looking for good value for their money.
It's like you get the best of both worlds, the historical depth of Rome, Athens, but with prices more like, well, places that might not have as much history to offer.
You got it. Istanbul is a great deal for travelers who want rich experiences but don't want to go broke doing it. That combination, affordability, and tons of history and culture, that's why it's become such a top destination.
All right, so we've journeyed through time, the names, the strategic importance, all those architectural wonders. Now picture yourself walking through Istanbul's streets.
Imagine yourself in the Grand Bazaar, all those colors, shops, crafts, or maybe you're strolling along the Bosporus, the water dividing Europe and Asia, ancient and modern, all mixed up.
Maybe you're in a cafe having Turkish tea, the smell of spices everywhere, or listening to traditional music in the streets.
Whatever your vision is, there's no denying it. Istanbul has this magic that pulls you in, stays with you.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, think about this. How do you think all that history shapes what Istanbul is like today, why people love it so much? Keep that in mind as we go even deeper into what makes Istanbul so captivating. It's amazing how Istanbul has this ancient history, but it's also so modern, bustling, not just stuck in the past.
Yeah, it's not a museum, it's alive. I think that's what attracts people. It feels like history is still happening there, like the city's always talking to its past while moving into the future.
Makes me think about how culturally diverse it is, too, like a meeting point for so many different things.
Right at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, for centuries, it's been a melting pot. You see it everywhere, the food, music, art, even just looking at the people, East meets West, and not just on the map, but ideas, customs, how people live.
And that diversity is in the religious landscape, too. We've talked about the Hagia Sophia, but there are all kinds of religious communities in Istanbul.
Definitely. Mosques, churches, synagogues, all close together, same neighborhoods, shows a history of tolerance, coexistence, which it wasn't always perfect, but it's shaped the city's culture.
That idea of a bridge, different cultures and beliefs meeting, mixing, sometimes clashing. But it all adds up to what we see today.
Exactly, and I think that appeals to a lot of travelers, especially now. People want more than just sights. They want to really experience a culture, understand it.
Not just checking things off a list, but getting a feel for the place, the good and the bad. Istanbul definitely offers that. But let's switch gears. What about the food? Istanbul's cuisine is supposed to be amazing.
Oh, it's a feast for the senses. The smells in the bazaars, the spices, the taste of fresh simit bread, the colors of Turkish delight. It's really something else.
Just like the city itself, right? All these flavors and influences mixing over time, creating something totally unique and delicious. With the whole Turkish coffee culture, it's more than just a drink. It's an event, a social thing.
You got it. Sitting in a coffee house, having that strong coffee, maybe some baklava, it's like traveling back in time. And you find it all over Istanbul, busy cafe, little corners of the Grand Bazaar.
So history, architecture, culture, food. Well, what about modern Istanbul? It's not all about the past, right? What about people who want a more contemporary experience?
Oh, it's a modern city, definitely. A thriving art and culture scene, great nightlife, a real energy to it, especially with the younger crowd. It's a city that never sleeps. Something for everyone, no matter what you're into.
I've heard the contemporary art scene is really interesting.
It's booming. Tons of galleries showcasing Turkish artists, both well-known and up-and-coming, plus international artists. They're drawn to the city's energy. You'll find everything, traditional painting, calligraphy, to really modern stuff, installations, performance art.
So this ancient city is also a place for new ideas, new art.
Exactly. Tradition and modernity side by side, even inspiring each other. That makes it so interesting, always changing.
Sounds like a place that always surprises you, makes you rethink things.
It defies categories. Ancient but modern, familiar but exotic, chaotic but somehow harmonious. I think that's the real appeal. It's an experience that hits you on all levels, your senses, your mind.
And makes you want to go back for more.
Definitely. Always something new to discover, no matter how many times you visit.
Speaking of discovering more, I'm curious about the Bosporus. We've mentioned it, but it seems like more than just a river,
It's the heart of Istanbul. Divides the city, but connects it to. It's beautiful. It's how people get around, and it inspires artists, poets, everyone.
Like a character in the story of Istanbul.
Exactly. Always there, shaping the city, its landscape, its history, even its soul.
I bet taking a ferry on the Bosporus is a must-do for visitors.
Oh, absolutely. Gliding along, seeing the city on both sides, hearing the calls to prayer from the mosques, that's the essence of Istanbul right there.
And you see the city in a whole new way, from the water, Asia on one side, Europe on the other.
It reminds you, Istanbul is a bridge between continents, cultures, history.
Okay, adding that to my Istanbul to-do list. But let's talk about something a bit more, well, tangible. The Grand Bazaar. We mentioned it, but let's dive in. What's so special about it?
It's sensory overload, but in a good way. A maze of colors, smells, sounds, textures. You can get lost in there for hours and still not see everything.
Sounds like a mini Istanbul, East meets West, old meets new, tradition and modernity.
You got it. You can find anything there. Turkish carpets, ceramics, spices, sweets, crafts. A shopper's dream, but also a cultural experience. You talk to local artisans, feel the real heart of Istanbul.
I can already picture myself haggling for souvenirs and having apple tea somewhere in there. But before we get too carried away with our Istanbul daydreams, there's something important we haven't really talked about yet.
I think I know what you mean. We talked about Istanbul as a bridge between East and West, but it also has to deal with how complicated that is.
Exactly. What are the challenges and the opportunities of being a city that's in both worlds like that?
People have been debating that for centuries, and Istanbul is still figuring it out. On the one hand, all that mixing creates a rich, dynamic culture, but there's always this need to balance things, holding on to tradition while becoming modern.
Sounds tricky.
It is, and you see it in everything, how the city develops, social rules, art, politics.
Like, the city itself is a reflection of those conversations, those struggles.
Exactly. That's part of what makes it so fascinating. Istanbul doesn't hide from the complexity. It embraces it, challenges it, and I think finds a way to make it work, make it beautiful, unique.
Like they say, out of chaos comes order. But maybe for Istanbul, it's more like out of chaos comes beauty.
I love that. Out of chaos comes beauty. That's Istanbul.
So as we dig deeper into what makes Istanbul so captivating, here's something else to think about. How does being this bridge between East and West affect how Istanbul deals with becoming modern, with globalization? Keep that in mind for our final part, where we'll look at how Istanbul's identity is changing and its place in the 21st century. It's really something how Istanbul takes these opposite ideas, tradition, and modernity, East and West, and makes them into something totally its own.
That's Istanbul for you. It doesn't fit in a box, always changing, but with deep roots. Ancient ruins next to super modern buildings, all in the same place.
The city itself is like living proof of that tension, old and new, what we know and what's different. And it somehow all works.
It does, and I think that's why people are drawn to it. You get to see a world that's both familiar and totally new, changes how you think about what a city can be.
It's more than just sightseeing, right? It's experiencing a whole different way of life.
Exactly, opening yourself up to new things, new ways of looking at the world. And Istanbul's the perfect place for that. All that history, the mix of cultures, that energy.
So wrapping up our deep dive into Istanbul, let's go back to something we talked about, Istanbul as this bridge between East and West.
That's a big part of how Istanbul sees itself, right? Always at the crossroads.
And now the world's getting more and more connected. How do you think that bridge idea will change for Istanbul in the 21st century?
Interesting question. I think Istanbul is in a great spot to be even more important, helping different cultures understand each other. It's always been a place where ideas meet, where people from all over came together to trade, share knowledge, create new things.
It's like it's built for that kind of exchange.
Right. And in a world that's so divided sometimes, Istanbul shows us how beautiful it can be when people connect.
So maybe Istanbul's biggest legacy isn't just the buildings or the history, it's that it can bring people together.
I think you're right. Istanbul celebrates its past and present, its differences and what unites people. It shows us a world where cultures don't just exist side by side. They thrive together, make each other better, create something amazing.
And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dive into Istanbul. We barely scratched the surface, but hopefully we've shown you some of the magic, made you want to explore more.
It's a city that rewards you for being curious, for exploring, a place that stays with you.
So if you're looking for an adventure, one that makes you think, makes you feel, consider Istanbul. You won't regret it.